here today at the Colorado School of Mines, and this is the Energy Perspectives podcast presented by Energy Dialogues. I'm Dominique Gómez. I'm the Deputy Director of the Colorado Energy Office, and I have two guests today. I will let each of them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about the organizations they work for.
Sure. Ryan Keeling. I'm a Geoscience Compliance Manager at Carbon America. So what I do is oversee the Class 6 permitting process, which is filing the carbon sequestration permits with the EPA. I also generate the testing and monitoring programs for carbon capture and sequestration facilities regionally within the United States. Carbon America is a vertically integrated CCS company, so carbon capture and sequestration company located right here in Arvada, Colorado.
Wonderful. And I'm Alexandra Smith. I am the strategy lead at Fervo Energy. Fervo is an enhanced geothermal system, EGS, next generation geothermal company. We are a power developer leveraging proven oil and gas fracking and horizontal drilling techniques to access tight rock in the subsurface to flow fluid through, heat up the fluid, use that fluid to turn it into steam and run a turbine. We're trying to produce clean, firm power across the entire United States. Like I said, am the strategy lead at Fervo. So what does that mean? Our core business model is to be grid connected, sell to the grid and sell to utilities. However, we are in a transmission constrained environment operating in the United States. So what my team is focused on doing is really looking at what's next beyond selling into the grid. What are potential behind the meter offtake opportunities for Fervo, and what can we do with other attributes of geothermal heat, such as direct heat applications.
Wonderful. Well, two great organizations to talk a little bit today. So here in Colorado, we have ambitious climate goals, and we're working to reduce our emissions. I'm interested to hear, maybe Alexandra, starting with you, what role you think geothermal can help us play in addressing the climate crisis?
It's a great question. I think geothermal has a huge role to play in addressing the climate crisis. Right now, geothermal makes up less than 4% of electricity production in the United States. That is a very small percentage. Geothermal is a 24/7 clean, firm source of power, meaning it doesn't matter if the sun is shining or if the wind is blowing, you can still produce power with geothermal. So geothermal it's going to be very important for geothermal to scale alongside solar and wind and the other intermittent renewables to provide that reliability to the grid. The other piece of the puzzle that I think is really interesting that I sort of touched on is this potential behind the meter application. Because it is a 24/7 operation, you can have these projects where you sell geothermal power to maybe a direct air capture plant or a hydrogen plant. You're basically selling the clean firm to processes that rely on their whole business models built around carbon reduction. Mm-hmm. So if they were to then instead take their power from a dirty grid, it can kill their economics. Anyway, I think geothermal can help unlock those types of technologies as well.
Wow, really interesting. Yeah, I think, in addition to the electricity, clean firm electricity, that partnership with other technologies is really interesting. Maybe we can dig into that a little bit more. And what about carbon capture?
Yeah, exactly. So along the same lines, our goal is to basically reduce the carbon intensity of certain industrial sectors. So there's many emitters out there spanning various industries: cement, steel, ethanol. Ethanol specifically, that's really what Carbon America keyed in on as far as industrial emitters go in order to reduce their carbon footprint. And those are some projects that I'll speak about later on during this podcast, specifically one in Northeast Colorado. But that's our goal is to reduce the carbon footprint and emissions from various emitters currently throughout the United States. And basically how we do that is installing and operating carbon capture equipment, pipeline, and sequestration facilities for these emitters.
Wonderful. Yeah. So we still need all the products that we currently rely on, and so making sure that we can reduce emissions from the industrial sector seems really important.
Absolutely.
Well, will each of you tell me a little bit about one project that you're particularly excited about that you've been able to work on?
Sure. Ours is Project Innova. It's Northeast Colorado. That's really our flagship project. First one for our company, and also the first one in the first carbon capture and sequestration project in Colorado, in the first in EPA Region 8, which is the EPA region kind of in the Midwest, mid-continent area. Colorado is a state under their purview. So we're really excited about that project and very excited about cutting our teeth. There was a steep learning curve for CCS in general, just because it's not a new industry, but it's being resurrected with the new tax incentive 45Q from the federal government. So a lot of people are getting back into it. There's a steep learning curve, and part of that learning curve is definitely the regulatory piece of it. So we had some difficult learnings, but nonetheless, at the end of the day, they were learnings, and very excited about that one. And it really got us in on the ground floor and allowed us to get the DOE-funded Carbon Safe project, and that's dubbed Project EOS in southern Colorado, just north of Pueblo.
Okay, wonderful. And the first project that you mentioned, what does it do?
Basically, those are two ethanol emitter or producers. So they emit CO2 currently, one in Sterling and one in Yuma, both in Northeast Colorado. So we're capturing the CO2 emissions from both of those facilities, and we plan to install a pipeline just southwest of Yuma, Colorado, about 10 miles southwest of Yuma, to sequester the CO2 there.
Okay, wonderful. And I'd love to hear more about the sequestration part in maybe a moment. But Alexandra, a project that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, I am really excited about our project, Project Cape. It is a 400 megawatt grid connected project in Southwest Utah. Once this EGS project comes online, it will be the second largest geothermal power plant in America. So it kind of tells you the scale. And we're really looking forward to that. One of the reasons that I'm so excited about this is we've already proven our technology. This was at a commercial pilot, Project Red. This is now our chance to really show that we can execute this massive project. And we're already showing that we can ride the learning curve on our drilling and bring down those drilling costs. Every new well that we have drilled has been drilled substantially faster than the previous well, and that directly translates into cost reduction. The other reason that I'm excited about Project Cape is kind of some of the tangential things that we're looking at around this project. So I mentioned it's a 400 megawatt project. That 400 megawatts is because that is our interconnection limitation. The resource is actually likely closer to about 2 gigawatts of potential energy, so it's massive. So we are also looking at, what else we can do with that power, which I've already mentioned. We do have a DAC Hubs award, one that we are prime on out in Southwest Utah. And so we're working with a number of direct air capture companies or technologies that would be interested in, setting up shop out in Southwest Utah and using our heat directly and our power for a more behind the meter kind of setup. And the reason I find this very exciting is it's not just straight offtake. We're doing actual integration work where we're trying to understand, okay, if we can give you really cheap heat, then maybe that can help their process. And simultaneously, the different quality of heat that they need will actually impact our well design. And so there's a lot of back and forth there, and kind of we're very excited.
Yeah, that co-location seems really exciting. And I think we talked a little bit earlier about the opportunity to travel to Iceland, where they also have co-location of geothermal and carbon capture. So it sounds like you're doing something similar here in the U.S. Really exciting. That's the goal. It's fun. Well, being at a state energy office, we think a lot about workforce, right? The workers that are needed to build out the climate jobs, across the whole spectrum, everything from HVAC technicians to electricians, people working on EVs, et cetera. But I'm curious, this is both a challenge in many places, right? We don't always have the workforce that we need in the places that we need them, but also such a huge opportunity, right, for good, well-paying, stable jobs. Maybe starting with you, Alexandra, can you talk to me a little bit about the kind of workforce that Fervo needs and how you think about it right now?
Yeah. About 60% of Fervo's workforce, both in-house and on the field, are directly from the oil and gas industry. We see a ton of overlap in skill set and even locations and a number of things between oil and gas workers and geothermal, particularly drilling operations, but then also even on the power production side. So we're very excited about that. It's one of the reasons that I switched over from the oil and gas industry myself into the geothermal industry. And, you know, the way that we actually view workforce development, these people can move fairly seamlessly from oil and gas to geothermal with almost zero training. No training. And so the reason that's so exciting is we believe that as long as we can just keep progressing these projects and grow as a company and grow as an industry, we will have a place for potentially displaced oil and gas workers to come and use their very high valued skills. So we're excited about it.
Wonderful. What about in carbon capture and, of course, sequestration as well?
I echo the same exact comments. It's almost identical with the CCS space. The workforce is there. The majority of it's coming from oil and gas. I came from oil and gas backgrounds, as did the majority of our company. But that's for the reason because of the subsurface expertise, which is very highly sought after in the carbon sequestration space because that's where you're sequestering the carbon. So, and again, I alluded to this on my previous comment, but CCS has been around, whether it be pure storage in saline aquifers or CO2 EOR, enhanced oil recovery. So, again, the workforce is there, and we're very happy about that. Again, to your point, it's very the job skill sets that already exist are very transferable back and forth. However, again, there's a learning curve. So the difference is there's a large regulatory nuance in the CCS space. So before you were dealing with state level oil and gas regulatory agencies, committees, for example, the Texas Railroad Commission, that's where you go through to drill a well, produce a well. Now it's in order to, for instance, drill a test well, stratigraphic test well, just to collect data, you go through the Colorado ECMC.
Energy and Carbon Management Commission.
Right, formerly known as the COGCC. So they rebranded.
Used to be Oil and Gas Commission.
Exactly, yeah. So first you go through the state in that regard, and then you file your 700-page Class 6 permit, which is your permit to ultimately inject CO2 with EPA Region 8. And that the lead time with that is much longer, just generally 2 years on average is kind of the timeline that's been thrown out there. So that's the major learning curve, is compiling those applications, and it's a very collaborative, multidisciplinary effort. And so I think that's the main learning curve that's associated with the process that the workforce would have to adapt to.
Yeah, 700 pages. I'm sure that's really good bedtime reading.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
So you're kind of touching this on a little bit already with sort of the regulatory, regimes and who you're working with, et cetera. Are there other barriers or things you think about just in terms of scaling it and moving quickly? And, I will say, obviously, from the state perspective, a lot of that regulation is really important, right, to make sure we do things well. But
Absolutely.
What barriers do you see? And then we'll go to Alexandra.
Yeah, I think first you hit on it. We've already discussed this. It's the regulatory barriers. Those are the longest lead times that we're having. And again, it's for a good reason. It's making sure that all of us are coming up the same learning curve at the same rate. Regulators are there on the same learning curve as are the operators, as are the stakeholders and the public who are releasing pore space from. So it's very important and needed. And I have confidence that those lead times and timelines will be accelerated and be decreased in the future. I would say in addition to that, I think the main barriers that we need to remain cognizant of are stakeholder engagement barriers. I think stakeholders are critical to the process, and they need to be involved at every step of the process, just to bring them along with us on the learning curve, just to make sure that they're continuously in the loop just as much as we are as operators and just as much as the regulators are as well. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to make these projects work. So
yeah,
I wouldn't say that's a barrier, but I would just say that that's a continued concern that we just need to be aware of and bring them along with us.
I'm so glad you brought up stakeholder engagement, because I couldn't agree more. It's so important. And at the same time, starting from a place where most people don't know anything about carbon capture, why would they, right? They have busy lives, jobs, kids, et cetera. But getting from there to a point where they kind of understand the project and the potential benefits and any concerns that they might have.
Absolutely.
Really important. Alexandra, any barriers that you're thinking about?
I would echo similar sentiments, but I can, talk about it in the geothermal lens. So like I've mentioned, that we believe the technology is there. We're also seeing very, very strong demand for clean, firm power. So both of those things are there. The barriers to basically keeping up with this crazy demand that we're seeing, from data centers and everything going electric and a number of other drivers. You can look at it in a couple ways. Transmission is obviously going to be a barrier for any power production, developer. The other one that I think is more relevant for this conversation is around permitting. So for Fervo, we can trigger a NEPA permit process 6 different times throughout our development cycle. That's much more than other power developers, and it's actually much more than oil and gas. So the solution that we see there is getting more on parity with oil and gas and getting some categorical exclusions for redundant permitting. So that's one area that I would consider a barrier to expediting this process. Maybe the other one is around financing. So Fervo's shown a really strong track record of being able to successfully raise venture capital funds. But what we are trying to do is very, very capital intensive. So we are actively seeking out, deals with the project finance community, and those conversations are going really, really well. But I think that if we want to, go as fast as we possibly can, getting additional funding support from the government could also be another lever there.
Yeah. I mean, I think from both of you, the discussion about the regulatory certainty and, you saying triggering the NEPA process, it seems, from the state and the federal level, we need to make sure we develop the right systems to regulate these processes, right? And not set up more hurdles than are necessary. So hopefully we'll see some big movement in both the state and the federal level here in coming years on that. Both of you have kind of touched on this. You mentioned some federal incentives, and you just mentioned financing. I am curious, obviously with the IRA and a lot of states moving to make both geothermal and CCS more financially attractive in their states. We're certainly doing that here in Colorado. What current incentives are you taking advantage of? What do you think is really important? Maybe Alexandra can start with you, and then hopefully you have something to say on this one too.
Yeah, we think the IRA is huge. The investment tax credit and the production tax credit are key parts to helping us continue to de-risk our technology and commercialize. We actually did just set up the first geothermal apprenticeship program in the U.S. in conjunction with Southern Utah University. So we're very excited about that. That will help us then qualify for these credits, and it's also touching on the workforce development piece. So
it's exciting. What about on the carbon capture side? What incentives are really important?
Definitely our IRA 45Q, potentially 45Z. In addition, something I think we would really like to see is some kind of landowner incentive that's given at a federal or a state level. And ideally that'd be a monetary incentive. And that's, again, that hits on the topic of getting landowners and external stakeholders involved and getting them to really buy into these projects. Otherwise, a good number of them might not happen. And so as a company, we view that as a very important piece of the puzzle that hopefully might happen someday. And what that looks like, we're not very sure, but it could be as simple as X number of dollars for acre of pore space, just to offer them a little bit more incentive to want to have these projects executed proximal to their land or directly underneath them or above them. That's what we see possibly on the horizon in addition to 45Q and 45Z.
Exciting. Well, good. Well, I know we're about to wrap up. Just want to ask one last kind of personal question. We both mentioned that you come from oil and gas. Just curious how you came into this role and how you heard about it. I assume that there's some interest in just addressing climate change, but would love to hear a quick background on that.
Yeah, so I was in oil and gas, and I wanted to make the pivot into climate tech. Had no idea how to go about doing that. I was a process engineer who worked offshore, and I was like, where can those skills be used anywhere else? So I actually left to go get an MBA. And I spent 2 years just trying to figure out where would I make sense and how could I leverage what I find to be a very strong background, and use that for to help address the climate crisis. And so, I mean, I found Fervo. It's the most perfect combination of everything. Sarah Jewett, she is the first contact that our VP of strategy at Fervo. She was the first person I had met at Fervo, and she also is from, an oil and gas background, very similar to myself. And the whole company, they really value that skill set. And so that felt great. And obviously the mission of the company is very exciting to me. So
Wonderful.
I guess on the opposite end of the spectrum, mine was completely unintentional, because it wasn't because of the ethical side of it. It was just because I was unfamiliar with how much steam that this industry as a whole, geothermal, hydrogen, CCS, how much traction that it was gaining, especially under the current administration. So I did become aware of Carbon America specifically, and the job in Denver was also a nice addition to that, coming from Houston, being born and raised. So once I did see Carbon America out there, what they were doing, also their mission, and their mission is basically just to capture as much CO2 as quickly as possible. Once I became familiar with that and their goal, after talking to some of the leadership there and also my boss, it was definitely a selling point for me, coming from oil and gas and being familiar with being with that industry since I was out of school, seeing this change really in just the way that these companies thought about going forward and how this could create a whole new industry was very attractive to me from a career standpoint. And so that immediately made me want to sign up with Carbon America. And so I did.
Well, great. Well, we're so lucky to have you here in Colorado, and we certainly welcome Fervo to come work with us here in Colorado as well. And thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.